Is someone out to kill Cindy Carlson? Does Karl Karlsen have plans to murder his wife, or is Cindy just paranoid? Let's find out. Before we get to Cindy, we have to first talk about Karl Karlsen. Because as you may have guessed, he's a central figure in this story. In the Air Force, he was a truck driver. Karl's job was to transport nuclear weapons for the US Air Force. This job, as you may have guessed, is highly specialized and thoroughly regulated. And while the training is classified, it would have likely meant Karl had undergone a pretty intensive preparation to be able to do it. He eventually left the Air Force after being offered a job at a sheet metal business in California. He later started a duck farming business where he would raise baby ducks and sell them to various people and restaurants. Then, in the late 1980s, Karl met what would soon become his first wife, the beautiful and loving Christina Carlson. The couple was very happy as they settled down in California and started a family. They had 3 children named Levi, Aaron, and Katie. They were a happy little family of 5. Unfortunately, in 1991, the Carlson house caught on fire. As the house went up in flames, Karl tried his best to get everyone out of the house as quickly as possible. Karl managed to save all 3 of his children from the fire, but his poor wife, Christina, didn't make it out of the house. Christina was locked inside the bathroom of the house, and Karl wasn't able to get to her in time. The fire department came, and the fire was eventually put out, and the house was destroyed. The police, of course, investigated this fire to determine the cause, and of course investigated the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of Christina Carlson. Why couldn't she get out of the bathroom? It turns out that the bathroom window had actually been boarded shut a few weeks prior because it was broken, according to Karl, so she couldn't escape that way. The case was initially ruled as an accidental death, and Karl was able to collect a life insurance policy worth over $200,000 on her death. After the fire of 1991, Karl packed up the kids and everything from California and decided to drive across the country and start a new, fresh life together in a new state, New York. But unfortunately for old Karl, death and fire seemed to keep following him everywhere he went. A few years after Christina's death, and years after emotionally healing from the tragic incident, Karl met a wonderful woman named Cindy. They got married and started a family of their own. They had 1 child together and named him Alex. Now fast forward to 2008. Cindy and Karl were scheduled to go to a funeral of a family friend who had passed away. Before the couple left the house to attend the funeral, Karl told Cindy he was going to go into the garage and let his son Levi know they were heading out the house. Levi was in the garage working on his truck. Karl then returned from the garage, and he and Cindy hopped in the car and went on their way. After attending the somber event, Cindy and Karl returned home. Karl went into the garage to let Levi know that they made it back, but Karl walked in on a horrible scene. Karl came into the garage to find his son crushed up under the vehicle, lying lifeless on the garage floor. Karl was horrified and rushed inside and instructed Cindy to call 911 immediately.
911, what's location of your emergency?
I think I need an ambulance.
Okay, what's going on?
The truck fell on my stepson.
Are you with your son right now?
He's not alive.
Is he breathing?
No.
Okay, we're going to start CPR, okay?
Yeah, Carl, they want to start CPR. Do you know CPR? Chest is crushed. His chest is crushed.
The authorities rushed over right away, but it was already too late. Levi had passed away. Through an investigation with the police, it was determined that Levi was working underneath a truck that was being propped up by a jack when the truck suddenly came crashing down onto him, crushing his chest and causing fatal injuries. It was strange though. Levi had worked on trucks many times. This was not his first rodeo, but this time something must have gone wrong. Or maybe bad luck? After the investigation, the death was ruled as an accident. And once again, that trusty, newly purchased life insurance policy sure came in handy for Karl. In fact, Levi had just purchased this life insurance policy plan only weeks before this horrible incident. And Karl had actually taken Levi to get his will notarized the morning of his death. The timing is incredible. You see, Levi had been previously married and had kids, but had since been divorced. He took out a life insurance policy to help protect his kids in case anything bad ever were to happen to him. Levi's kids were too young to handle the money on their own, so he would have to name someone else to be the beneficiary to handle the finances for them until they were old enough. So Levi listed his father Karl as the beneficiary in the hopes that he would handle the money for his young kids to benefit from. Karl received over $700,000 from his son's life insurance policy, and he received his money within 4 months after Levi died on November 20th, 2008. That's a lot of dough. Of course, the money was supposed to go towards Karl's grandkids' immediate needs and for their future needs, but that's not exactly what happened here. Karl really dipped into the funds for himself. He was actually blowing through the cash pretty quickly. After only about 3 years after Levi's untimely death, the money was almost all gone. Those poor kids have no say in the matter. They lost their father and their funds and are totally unaware of what's going on. It's heartbreaking. Karl's wife, Cindy, started to grow suspicious of Karl after watching his spending habits. She got a bad feeling about the whole thing, so she started to look into Karl's past. She rediscovered and reanalyzed the 1991 death of his first wife, Christina, in that tragic fire, where Karl had gotten a nice lump sum of money from the life insurance. Cindy also discovered that Karl once had collected insurance money after an accidental fire broke out in his horse stables that killed all of his horses trapped inside there. Kinda strange that 2 major fires had impacted Karl's life. Cindy also found that Karl once filed an insurance claim on a Dodge Charger he owned way back in 1989. Supposedly, the car randomly caught fire back then, and he filed a report and received insurance money. Sure, there was no fire involved with Levi's death, but there was still something fishy going on. All of these unfortunate accidents ended with Karl collecting money from insurance policies. Cindy didn't know what to do. She had no proof or evidence that Karl had done anything wrong. All she had was a gut feeling. So the only thing she really could do was confide in a close friend. She told her friend that she was beginning to think that maybe Karl had something to do with the death of his son Levi. And now with his new life insurance policy for Cindy, she is worried for her safety. The friend told her that she was probably just being paranoid and that Karl was a good guy, not to mention the father of the deceased, and he wouldn't be capable of something so sinister. But if she really wanted to be sure, she told Cindy that she should hire a private investigator to poke around. And that's what Cindy did. She found and hired a private investigator to look into her husband and see if anything sketchy was going on. Cindy and the private investigator met up and decided that they would schedule a meeting with Karl, sort of like a sting operation. The investigator disguised himself as a promoter who wanted to meet with Karl to talk about his duck business. He said he could help sell Karl's ducks to local restaurants to supply their menu needs and help his business reach its full potential. Karl invited the investigator disguised as a promoter over to his house to have the meeting. And although no major information was given at this meeting, the investigator did get creepy vibes from Karl. At one point, Karl had said something weird about liking to kill ducks the old-fashioned way, and then put his hands around the investigator's neck and gave it gentle squeezes, like he was gonna suffocate and strangle him. Super sketchy to do to someone you just met. But like I said, the investigator didn't receive any vital information that could help Cindy in her case. Cindy then confided in her cousin, who she was close with, and told her everything she had been up to, including working with a private investigator. And although Cindy told her not to tell anyone, thankfully the cousin turned around and called the police and gave them the scoop. The police discovered that Karl had just recently taken out life insurance policies on Cindy as well as their 2 grandchildren. Karl was listed as the sole beneficiary of each of the policies. Was Karl plotting an attack on his next victims? The payout for the insurance policies of the grandchildren would come out to be $744,000. Another huge payout. It seems like Karl was setting himself up for a lifetime of insurance payouts. Cindy was shocked. She hadn't heard anything about him taking out a life insurance policy on her or the grandkids. Naturally, her next step was to leave Karl. She moved out of their house. Karl tried to contact Cindy with calls and texts that felt pretty threatening to Cindy. One of the text exchanges suggested that Karl knew that Cindy had been snooping around and was looking for answers. Then one day, Cindy got an idea. She saw a Dateline episode where a woman tried to get get her mother to confess to killing her father, so she thought that's a brilliant idea. She would meet up with Karl, wear a tape recorder in her bra, and try to get him to say something incriminating involving Levi's death. Then she could just hand it over to the police and justice could finally be served. So Cindy called up Karl and told him she missed him and wanted to get back together with him. She asked Karl to meet up with her at a restaurant in the Finger Lakes. The pair met up at a restaurant to have dinner and talk things out. Cindy got right down to business. She told Karl that the only way they could salvage this relationship was if Karl would start telling her the truth about everything. Karl started talking about the death of Levi. Cindy asked Karl, was it hard to push the truck over and to have it fall onto Levi's body? Karl responded by saying, quote, "No, it wasn't." That was an admission of playing a part in Levi's death. After the dinner, Cindy took the tape over to the police, but unfortunately, the restaurant at which they had dined in was very loud and noisy. You couldn't make out the words that were recorded on the tape recorder, so it was basically all for nothing. But the police were on Cindy's side and totally believed what she was saying. They asked her if she would be willing to try and wear a wire and record him again. Cindy agreed to wear a wire again and record their entire dinner conversation. So Cindy set up another meeting with her estranged husband, Karl. This time they would meet up at Abigail's restaurant in Seneca Falls, New York. At this second meeting, Cindy got right down to business and started asking Karl about Levi's death. She asked him to remind her about the details. Cindy said something along the lines of, "You told me you pushed the truck, right?" And this time Karl responded saying, quote, "No, I didn't. I said I took advantage of the situation once it had already happened." Cindy turned the recorded tape over to the police, but this time they said it wasn't enough of a confession for them to arrest him, but it was enough to work with. They brought Karl into the station for some informal questioning. The police asked him all sorts of questions before arriving at the topic of Levi's death. Karl started describing the details of the day his son died. Karl's story was consistent with what he had told the police years earlier when the incident had just happened. But then Karl gave the police a new piece of information. Karl told the police that he had found Levi crushed up under the truck before he left the house to attend the funeral, not after. So basically, Karl's saying he saw his son was dead and he just turned around, hopped in the car like nothing happened, and went to the funeral with Cindy. That is some psycho behavior for sure. And Karl kept talking to the police and digging himself a deeper and deeper hole. The police knew they were definitely onto something. After 8 hours of questioning, Karl divulged another new detail. Karl said that he actually saw the vehicle fall onto Levi and that he might have been the reason why the vehicle came crashing down onto Levi. He said that while the car was jacked up, he opened the car door to get something out of it, and when he did that, the truck slipped off the jack and crushed Levi. Even with this new confession, Karl insisted that Levi's death was a total accident. However, the police were not convinced. They were not buying any of Karl's excuses. They arrested Karl on second-degree murder. Once this news came out, it seemed that some of Karl's friends and family members were not too surprised. In fact, some of them had had suspicions on Karl for years. Karl did indeed kill his son. But what about the other insurance claims? What about his first wife, Christina? Well, the fire happened back on New Year's Day, 1991. Karl was in the detached garage when the house erupted in flames. The 3 kids were inside the house, peacefully taking naps when the fire first started. Karl charged into the burning building and managed to get all of the kids out safely. But he had previously stated that he was unable to help rescue his wife Christina from the bathroom of the house and bring her out to safety because there was not enough time. However, there is something strange about that bathroom. There was a window to the outside, but the window had actually been boarded up at the time of the fire, preventing Christina from escaping quickly out of the window. Karl said that he had boarded up that broken bathroom window months ago, but close family friends confirmed that they had recently been at the Carlson residence just a week prior to the fire, and at that time, the bathroom was not boarded up. More than that, the Carlson kids actually remember hearing their mother screaming for help that day inside the house as their father Karl packed them in the car and they all drove away. During the fire investigation, it was determined that kerosene was actually spread throughout the house. There was kerosene all over the hallway and kerosene leading all the way up to the bathroom where Christina was trapped inside. This seemed super sketchy, so of course the authorities questioned Karl about the kerosene, to which Karl replied that the family dog had knocked over a can of kerosene a few days earlier, and he must not have cleaned it up very well. After the house fire, Karl decided to pack up the family and move them to New York. The family left, and Karl missed his last interview with the authorities investigating the house fire. So they just decided to close the investigation on the house fire and ruled it to be considered an accident. Karl then was able to collect $200,000 on Christina's life insurance policy. With Karl being arrested for the death of his son Levi, it brought up all these old unanswered questions about his wife Christina's death. They wanted to reopen the case, and luckily some new information came out. Although Karl was sticking to the same story that the dog spilled the kerosene days before the fire, a fire marshal had some different information. The fire department said that through their investigation, they determined that the kerosene they found at the crime scene had been spread or dumped out onto clothing in the hallway and bathroom area mere minutes before the house erupted into flames. So it wasn't the dog who knocked over a bottle of kerosene a few days before. The police said it was clear that someone had dumped the kerosene and set this fire on purpose, and the only people in the house was the Carlson family. The kids were asleep. Christina in the bathroom. That means there's only one person who could have done this: Karl. Anyway, the trial for Levi's tragic death started on November 6, 2013 in Seneca County, New York. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Karl had deliberately caused Levi's death in order to collect on a life insurance policy worth $700,000 that he had taken out on Levi just a few weeks before the accident occurred. Former New York State Police investigator Jeff Arnold said, "The life insurance policy that's taken out on Levi prior to his death, I think it's beyond bizarre. Karl made it out to be that Levi didn't trust his ex-wife and that Levi wanted his daughters taken care of, and he trusted his dad." At the trial, the prosecution argued that Karl had used a chain hoist and other materials to position the truck in such a way that made it more likely to fall, and that he was the only person present in the garage when the accident occurred. Karl's defense team argued that the death was an accident and that there was no evidence linking Karl to any wrongdoing. They also suggested that Levi may have accidentally knocked the truck off its supports while working underneath it. Then out of nowhere, Karl actually pled guilty to the second-degree murder charges and the insurance fraud. Karl fully admitted to being the culprit behind jacking the truck up incorrectly and on purpose, and then convincing his son Levi to get up under the truck to perform some work on it and then push the car in such a way that it would fall onto Levi, crushing his son to death. Which sounds like one of the scariest ways you could die, and then just leaving you there for hours and hours before calling the police. At the trial, the judge sentenced Karl Karlsen to 15 years to life in prison, and as a part of his plea deal, the insurance fraud charges were dropped. And because of this, California decided to open back up the investigation of Christina Carlson's death. So after all these years, finally in 2014, Karl was officially charged with the murder of his wife, Christina Carlson, and he was then extradited over to California to stand trial. While waiting his trial, Karl made an attempt to appeal his conviction for his son Levi's death in 2017, but the great state of New York rejected his attempts at appeals. Karl finally made it to trial in California on January 13th, 2020 in Calaveras County, California. Finally, the jury came to a conclusion. Karl Karlsen is guilty. It took 29 long years for Christina Carlson to get the justice she deserved. But finally, in 2020, Karl Karlsen was found guilty of murder and is being kept behind bars. As always, thank you so much for watching another episode of Killer Bites True Crime Cases. I'm Brandy, and please stay safe out there. And don't commit insurance fraud. It's only a matter of time before you'd get caught. Bye.